Actually, just before we kick off, obviously I'm going to introduce the panel. You've got Katie Barron, Head of Retail from Stylists. We've got Matt Judge, who is the Principal at 8 Inc. and a very, very tall man, 6'8", nearly.
Guilty.
And Corinna Nobbs, who is the Digital Storyteller at Holition. So Katie covered quite a lot in her presentation, so I really think we should kind of try and stick to three main areas to give you a bit of a deeper delve into things, and really thinking about why and what for and why consumers really want to do this. So the first topic that I was picking up on was the idea of seducing with speed. And of course, when we think about speed, we must of course think of the consumer. We live in a time where we expect things right now, but of course as a brand, you need to consider how that might translate to experiences. So I guess we'll kick off kind of with Katie and Corinna, and as both of you have fashion industry experience, in the last year we've seen a lot of brands playing around with the see now, buy now, and it's not just about a quick satisfaction, it's got to be about the experience. So perhaps, Katie, first you might want to talk a little bit about how this sits within the luxury market.
Well, I think part of this idea of speed is about, as I mentioned, it's about creating speed in some places so that you can kind of create more lengthy sort of dwell times, whether it's physically or digitally in other places. I mean, something else we've talked about a lot is the idea of digital delay, that some of these experiences you want to really speed up, kind of expedite things, whether it's payments, etc. But there's also that idea of connecting to things where actually maybe you're creating a sort of staggered system. So you're kind of buying one thing very quickly, but then you're doing things on a weekly basis, or you're getting fed something at another point. So it's not all just about instant gratification. I think the idea with some of these ideas was to show how seductive it can be to kind of create a faster space in some places, but then allow you to kind of free up other elements. With some of these things, with VR, for instance, I think the thing with the power of the gaze, the interesting thing for me was that you could remain in the experience itself. So actually, that could be seen as quite dangerous in some ways, but that's why you're seeing these sort of self-editing checkouts and things like that. So you have these kind of stop-off points during the journey where you can check what you've done. But the idea is the things that allow you, as we're getting more immersive and as we're getting more, VR allows us to have these kind of blurred realities. Actually, we don't want to have to be pulled out of that experience to make the payment. So the kind of payment is fast on the one hand, or the transaction or the communication is fast, but you actually don't leave the exciting kind of experience that you're mulling around in.
Yeah. Corinna?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a lot of those points as well. At Holition, we kind of operate at a couple of different levels of the market. Charlotte Tilbury, although that's at a higher price point in terms of product, we provide them 10 different looks in 40 seconds, and the sheer delight that it provides for them is functional, because it means they don't have to try on 10 looks. It's just practically impossible, obviously, to do that in a physical context. But also it provides them with kind of delight, and then leads them to the next stage of the whole experience, which tends to be a one-on-one with the in-store makeup artist.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because it's definitely reflecting what's happening in stores as well, that you're having these kind of short experiences on one hand in the same space, and then a longer space. So with Charlotte Tilbury, exactly as with online, you can look at all these things and then decide what you want to do, and then come back and have this kind of hour-long experience. Even the store is divided in that way, that an entire floor of the store is about having payment by iPads, 15-minute makeovers, and then the downstairs part of the store is about sitting around having champagne, having a full hour-long makeover, maybe having some kind of masterclass in there. So it's interesting to see how it's being reflected in all areas.
And in terms of sort of talking about Rimmel, and I guess that kind of taps into your younger consumer, can you tell us a bit more about how that differs from maybe the work with Tilbury?
Sure. So one of the reasons that the kind of point of difference, if you like, for that app, it's called Get the Look, is that we spoke to lots of younger customers, and they said, I wanted just to be able to take a photo of Kate Moss in a magazine and then see how I can apply that makeup. So we basically made that possible. You take a picture of an image or a makeup on a friend, you hold it up against yourself, and it through augmented reality, it projects that image onto the screen, and then it'll tell you all the products, and then it also gives you potential for tutorials as well. So there's like education, there's experiential, and there's also commerce.
And maybe you can't say, but what's kind of the ROI that these clients are seeing? Can you give us a little bit more information?
They go by stickiness, so they're noticing that people are using the app on a really regular basis, and also in like consumer focus groups and things like that, people are the kind of qualitative notion of that's actually really useful. So it's kind of been branded as the Shazam for beauty, and again, it kind of marries that bridge between kind of hedonic and also utilitarian as well in terms of what customers want.
Okay. Matt, on the other hand, you're, I guess, looking more at creating holistic spaces, retail spaces. How does speed play into this kind of ethos when you're creating those spaces?
Well, I think it's about picking up on something you said, contextualizing speed. So there are times where you want an incredibly expedited process to do something. It might be buying a cable. And then there's an example where if you're going to spend £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 up to, I don't know, working in automotive as well, 30, 40, 50,000 pounds on something, speed isn't the defining quality that you're looking for from that experience. So when you say holistic, so A-Think design a lot of retail spaces. We're not retail designers, I wouldn't call us. I call us experience designers. But we, the thing that we're most known for is designing the Apple stores. So since 20 years ago, we've been working with Apple, designing those spaces. I actually used to work for Apple, so I understand the other side of the machine as well. But when you think about how Apple approaches that, and we talked about holistic, if you look at it through an omni-channel lens, it's how you're allowing people to connect to the space before they've even walked into the space. So I think that's an important quality, how you can interact with the staff, how you understand the staff, how you understand the store. You know, it's amazing even now, actually, Google, when you Google a store or a space or a hospitality experience, it'll even tell you how busy those spaces are at certain times of the day. So I think it's just about that kind of how you facilitate speed. Of course, you can do it through very practical means, such as wayfinding, designing an intuitive space that allows you to permeate it without feeling controlled, maybe. But I think ultimately it's about being respectful of people's time and understanding that some conversations need many hours, many minutes. Some conversations maybe don't need any human interaction at all.
I think the really interesting thing that from all of these things is that sense of duality. You know, I think it's not a coincidence that in my presentation, in some parts I talk about things that are more automated and more speedy, and then I, at the end, talk about discovery, because, you know, even talking about cars, you know, dealing with something where you're spending, you know, tens of thousands of pounds, I think the main point is that we're looking at communications tools and store spaces and all the places that intersection between those, where you're having conversations with brands and businesses where you literally on a daily basis you might be going from a very short conversation to a very long conversation. It's a bit like thinking of them in that kind of concierge way, or you know, I was going to say a friend, but I mean in more of a concierge way. So you might be literally wanting to have a much more in-depth conversation about this car that you're maybe co-creating, but then there might be just quick questions you want to ask about it as well. So none of these experiences exist in a kind of either or. I think it's very much about how brands are really meshing the fast and the slow together.
So it's almost customer ease in those situations? Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you another example. So we're working with a huge financial institution in Turkey, one of the biggest banks across the country. And how their perception of speed is an incredibly hierarchical, which is probably reflective of their culture. So you come in, you announce yourself to the space through using your card, and then they'll effectively put you in this invisible queue that says you've got more money than that person, therefore you're more important. And of course, I can see both of you smiling. You're probably smiling as well. So when you come from this culture, so when you're from this culture, though, you probably think, well, I mean, a lot of the spaces we try and create are far more egalitarian. So it's actually respecting, again, time is as precious to everyone and as equally. So it's about one of the big journeys we've been going through with them is how you stop looking at someone through a product segmentation and start looking at them through more psychographic need segmentation. What do people need coming to that space? And how can you help to prioritize them according to those needs, those more emotional needs versus a binary number that that dictates your relationship effectively.
Maybe just to add on to that, another example, something we're developing at the moment is kind of related to emotional kind of motion recognition technology, so that changing the experience of the customer based on the facial expressions that they make, whether that's in a magic mirror type experience, is what we're kind of playing with at the moment. Because I think, as well as I think the mood that you're in, what dictates
People's past purchase histories, their browsing and their buying patterns. It was basically something that would create palettes and select kind of a line with clothes from their collection, but based on what was on people's Pinterest boards. So it's a little bit like if anyone looks at their Instagram account or their Pinterest boards, you'll see kind of commonalities aesthetically. So it was a little bit like plugging to aesthetic brains to make recommendations. It's actually much more successful than saying we know what you've bought, because especially with someone like Topshop, you know, their consumers are quite mercurial in terms of their tastes. You know, their tastes are being led by the trends that brand is setting. So actually, just creating systems that are based on what people have bought can be a rather kind of false gauge, I think. So it's interesting talking about emotions. A funny one, because I think a lot of those systems aren't really advanced enough yet. You know, there's that like hilarious one with Uniqlo where it was like, if you're sad, buy something with spots on it, and it's like, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. But I think that's an area where there's loads of exciting advances to happen. Definitely, yeah.
The other thing I was just going to add then to that is that I'm so curious about how all these things are going to continue to evolve, because we're now seeing a new generation of consumer growing that is so completely accustomed to immediacy. You know, so Dave, our strategist at 8, his son went and watched Tottenham play with his dad. And they came back and he said to him, you know, tonight we'll watch this on Match of the Day. And he couldn't get into his head why he couldn't watch it now. He couldn't get into his head that it needed to be broadcast at a certain time. And that generation of shopper, their expectations are going to be radically different again.
We were looking at this for Christmas, actually, and people used the expectation for a fast Christmas delivery was 3 to 4 days. That was like lightning speed. And now it's one. Now it's 1 day as fast. So
2 hours in
90
London.
minutes. So matchesfashion.com have just introduced the 90-minute delivery slot. So let's see how that goes.